Thank you so much, Suzanne. And I'm just going to start up my presentation here. Could you just confirm that you can see that for me?
Yes, we can.
That's perfect. All right. So it's so good to be here. Hello to everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. I want to start by giving you a bit of background on the company that I've recently joined, Fablevision. It's a Boston-based media production studio, and we are on a mission to bring the world to a better place through media, storytelling, and technology. And we create games, mobile apps, websites, interactive museum kiosks, animations and videos, and we also do creative consultancy, and we also create our original content, original IP as well. And I'm right here in the Boston studio, which is actually on the 6th floor of the Boston Children's Museum, which is in the center of the screen there, next to the channel. And I have one of the windows at the top there, and I overlook the Tea Party ships, which are at the bottom right there. So every 30 minutes, I get reminded of how the tea was chucked overboard in reenactments, and so that's my penance for being British and living in Boston. So it's a great place to be. We have a range of partners, including household names in the worlds of publishing, television, broadcasting, museums, educational institutions, and other corporations as well. And our work covers all age ranges. And one of the partners on this list here is Learning Games Network. And along with Learning Games Studios, Fablevision has worked with these guys over the years on some fantastic educational games. One of these games is Zenos. And I'm going to use Zenos as an example straight away in this webinar to give you a taster of what game-based adult learning can actually look like. So Zenos is a playful social application that uses single player and multiplayer games to build English language skills. It's being used across the country right now, in fact, as part of One America's English Innovations blended learning program. And it was originally created by the Learning Games Network and is being distributed by the Learning Games Studios. So I'm going to play you a little video that shows us the experience that a player has in Zenos, and I'll give a little running commentary of what's going on. And I just want you to, as you're looking at this, sort of think about all of the different elements, and we're going to unpack each of those elements after we've looked at the video and after you've got a sense of what game-based learning looks like. So players begin by entering a virtual world, and it's a world that offers a safe, fun place to learn. You can choose your native language for translations of English words, and also on-screen help and instructions. You start off by creating an avatar, and then you're given a series of missions that you must complete in order to level up. And the missions guide you forward and track your progress. And you learn by playing single and multiplayer games, such as those on the screen right now, that develop your ability to read, write, listen, and also speak. We have voiceover IP in this game. You learn by not through drills or quizzes, but rather engaging experiences that require the effective use of language skills to succeed. And built-in supports scaffold learning, and well-designed game mechanics create learning activities that are challenging but achievable for the players, whether you're competing with others or being challenged on your own. And a big part of the experience is also social. You explore the virtual world where you meet friends, and you can use the chat feature to practice your English in a low-stakes environment. And the idea is to gain confidence to use English in your everyday life. And anyone who has tried to learn a foreign language knows that two major barriers are a lack of practice and also a lack of confidence.
Go pick up the sandwiches, please.
And that's what we're overcoming with both both of those in this game. And Zenos also has an underlying analytics engine that provides reports so facilitators can follow the progress of their students. Now, I often ask the audience at this point, although it's a little hard to do so here, who thinks of themselves as a gamer? So I'll just post that question rhetorically. And often people think of that label in terms of what in the industry we call AAA games. And those are things like Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty, big games publishers who spend millions and millions of dollars and years to make big 3D games. But games also are much wider than that, and we think of mobile games, board games, sports games. They all come under the gaming umbrella, and games are an intrinsic part of our culture. And pretty much everyone is a gamer when you think about those types of games. And the clip that you've just been watching shows Zenos in action in a class in Virginia. And you can see that the players were engaged. It's both young and old. And this is one of the appeals of using games for education. So let's just take a moment to think about the types of behavior that people exhibit as they're playing games. Certainly people are having fun, but as a colleague of mine in the language learning space, Haida Wrigley likes to use, she likes to use the term hard fun. So that's when people are really engaged in interesting learning activities. So here are some of the behaviors that we see with gamers, whether it be well-designed educational games or pure entertainment games. So persistence, risk-taking, attention to detail, problem solving, and collaboration. A lot of games, again, if you sort of have a very narrow definition of games, you may just think of someone sat in their room on their own, but so many games these days are collaborative and social events as well. So this starts to shed light on why games can be so powerful in the education space. The reality is that creating a good game, any kind of game, is actually quite hard. And creating an educational game that is also fun is even harder. So although we'd like to simply just sort of take an educational experience and add gaming to it to get these player behaviors, it's a little more complicated than that in practice. And in a moment, I'll talk some more about some of the common pitfalls and also some tips for designing games. But first, I want to take another sort of step backwards and share a framework for understanding what it is about games that are so engaging and result in these player behaviors. So let me introduce you here on screen, not in person, to a friend, great friend and colleague, Scott Osterweil, who is the creative director of the MIT Education Arcade. And if anyone knows the classic educational game Zombinis, then you have Scott to thank, as he is the creator and game designer for Zombinis. And he's actually shown in pixelated form down there with some of the Zombini characters. And Scott created a framework called the 4 freedoms of play with some of his colleagues. And this is so helpful to think about when we're thinking about play, we're thinking about games. So the first of these 4 freedoms that he talks about is the freedom to experiment while playing. So there's so many different things that you can do when you're playing a game or just playing in general. And there's different ways to explore, and you're not limited to just one small task. So related to that is the freedom to fail within play. It doesn't matter if you don't reach a particular goal or if you mess up. After all, it's only a game and the stakes are much lower than in the real world. So that's where we get some of those behaviors of kind of risk-taking and experimentation from. The third freedom is the freedom of identity. And this is about, in a play setting, role-playing and trying to be something or someone that you aren't in the real world, which helps us prepare for new roles in life, and also opens us up to other people's perspectives. There's a whole sort of genre of empathy games coming out of independent producers in the last few years, where you get to sort of step into someone else's shoes and understand what it might be like to make the decisions or go through the experiences that they go through, including games that you wouldn't sort of normally associate with games and play. The subject of kind of childhood cancer is the subject of one game. There's another game called Papers, Please, where you take on the role of a immigration official in a state where you have to make decisions based on government policies about whether to let people in or not. And, you know, at the beginning of the game, it's fairly obvious what to do, but then there's some really subtle kind of nuances and decisions that you have to make at your discretion around some of the people who are coming in. At the same time, you're having to sort of deal with your own situation, providing for your family and working out and making sure that you kind of stay employed. So there's some interesting ethical decisions that pop up as part of that game. So really, you know, a whole range of games that go beyond the normal genre of just fun that we sometimes think about. The fourth freedom is the freedom of effort. And this is the idea that you cannot be forced to play. And in fact, when you think about gaming, you know, it is usually an optional thing. And even if you're in a game, you can have various degrees of participation. So in a game of tag, for instance, in when kids are playing in school, you could just decide to sit out and watch for a while. And it might be the same in a board game you play as an adult, that you are sometimes more invested than at other points in the game. And so this is the idea of the freedom of effort, which is that you have control over the amount of effort that you're exerting in the game at any one time. And so Scott argues that these four freedoms of play are also the four freedoms of learning, and that the two go hand in hand, and that really all of these freedoms that exist during play allow us to learn. We don't learn by sort of reading something and sort of immediately implementing it. You learn by trying things and actually by getting things wrong in a safe space, and then being able to try again and iterate and develop different strategies for succeeding. So, and all of this is backed up by the emerging field of learning science, where it turns out that a lot of what is classified as good pedagogy is actually present in gaming experiences. So there's a massive equivalence between the two, which we can dive into. I'm just going to dive into that in a moment. So, Suzanne, I remember we talked about potentially sort of stopping at points through the presentation just for you to let me know if there's any pertinent questions that have come up so far. So let me just take a pause point at this point.
Yes, that's great. I was actually just about to type into the chat. If anyone has any questions, put in the chat. Or so at this point, if you want to type in questions, or if you want to unmute anything you want to ask Peter before he moves to his next topic.
I see there's a comment from GONZ saying that he's had a go at making an app to learn about adding negative numbers and really want to get involved and make more for number sense and the basics. That's That's awesome. I love the idea of jumping in and trying to make something. There's a lot of good math games that are out there, so it's worth taking a look at what already exists, but there's also a lot of room for improvement.
And Philadelphia Works has a question, and maybe you, Philadelphia, you can unmute and explain a little bit. It's, can we change the Zenos English?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what's meant by that question. If you want to explain a little bit more, Philadelphia Works, then I will be happy to answer. It's certainly the case that you can learn, that you can change the settings so that if you're learning from a different language that isn't Spanish, the video was showing Spanish, then you can set that.
You can unmute if you hover over the bottom of your screen. You should be able to unmute, or on the participant list. Oh, Philadelphia Works, thank you. Says,
yes.
Change the default language from Spanish to English.
Yes, you can. So, so at the moment, Zenos is an English language learning game, and the supports that exist to help you, you can set what language those are in. So they could be in Spanish, or they could be in French. There's various other languages that are available, but you can also set it to English. And we actually did do that in some implementations with our implementation partners, because the students were a little more advanced, and the facilitators did not want the support language to be in their native language. So that was kind of interesting.
Okay, and we have another question from Vinod. How do you enable people at very different levels of literacy to collaborate in the same virtual space?
Well, that's a great question, and it was one of the features designed into Zenos from the beginning, is to allow people to meet each other within the virtual world who are at different levels. And part of the vision for the game is that, you know, and this is what happens in normal kind of massively multiplayer games, MMGs they're called, is that, you know, you will have all of the different levels of people sort of interacting together. And that's great because you can have, you know, people who've mastered content actually support and help players who are just on the start of their journey. So they can chat to each other, they can play with each other, and the content can actually adjust accordingly. So quite often in the game, there's different modes that it can be set up to be played in, but often we're trying to match people. So there's a matchmaking system that will match people who are at the same level to play with each other. But there are some gaming techniques that we can use to allow people at different levels to play with each other as well. And actually, there's a system called, there's sort of a game kind of system called rubber banding. And so if you imagine a rubber band, and a player who's really good is at this end of the rubber band, and a player who is not so good is at this end of the rubber band, the idea is that there are constraints put on those players to actually sort of pull them closer together for the purposes of playing the game. So the person who is at a higher level gets higher level content within kind of a multiplayer game, and the person at the lower level gets lower level content, but the game system is sort of, it's basically like a handicap in golf. So it allows people to play together. An example in a commercial game of rubber banding would be in Mario Kart, the racing game, where if you're at the front, then you'll actually face more obstacles. You might get more sort of banana skins that are thrown into your course, whereas somebody at the back is given a power up, a speed boost, or some other power up that helps them to go forward. So there's some super interesting ideas from the world of gaming that can be applied to make this work. I hope that was a little bit of a long answer, but hopefully
very interesting.
found it interesting.
And we have a question: is Zenos available now?
So it is distributed by the Learning Games Studios, and Ira Sokowitz, who is the CEO of that company, is actually on the Hangout here, so he could probably chat some more details into the group chat. But it's so it is a commercial product. There's a website. If you just go to learninggamestudios.com, you can find out more information on how to get access to the game, and it is being used right now across the country, and I know that I was ramping up the usage.
Great. And Jones had a comment about the overwhelming majority of games out there being too childish, that aren't too childish for adults, are drill ones. So I think what we can do, and I'll put it in the chat, is maybe share any games that we know, Zenos being one, that provide better building of concepts. And there, Ira, thank you for putting in information about Zenos and your email. So we can share some game ideas in the chat. And then, Peter, I think that's all the questions for right now. Again, you can type in the chat as we go along any questions, or we'll pause again at a time that's good for Peter.
Yeah, sounds good. And just to respond to the comment there that most of the games that aren't too challenging for adults are quizzes and draw you problems, I absolutely agree. There is really a lack of quality educational games for adults that are appropriate for adults in terms of the design and the look and feel and the story, but also are hitting on kind of higher level skills and aren't just drill and kill. So if you're thinking of getting into the business, then I encourage you to do so, because there's definitely a need for it. All right, so I'm going to continue on now. Now that we've done that pause point after the four freedoms, and I just want to take a look at some more features of well-designed learning games, and hopefully this will help with that, address that question. So if you're thinking of making games, then this is a great checklist that helps get you thinking outside of the box in terms of it's not just doing multiple choice questions and not just doing sort of drill and kill games, but to think about sort of more task-driven games and higher order skills. But also equally, if you're someone who is looking for games, this is a great checklist to go through as you're evaluating, to decide whether or not the game is actually a well-designed game and is going to meet your objectives and be engaging and pedagogically sound. So the first feature I want to talk about in well-designed learning games is task-based learning. And task-based learning is about giving learners a series of authentic challenges. It can be short-term challenges and long-term challenges. And these are concrete goals that are achievable, but challenging, and therefore motivate the player. So this is an example from a commercial game where there's primary and secondary objectives. So in a good game, the goal of the game is clear, even though it may not be totally clear at the beginning how to achieve that goal. And that's one of the things that you've got to figure out. But you do have a clear goal, and there is a set of goals that are usually given in a particular order that build up towards something, to build up to something much more meaningful. But it's all broken down into meaningful and doable chunks. So this increases motivation. Another feature is individualized learning within games, or personalized learning. And this means that the learner is going along at their own pace, and that they are getting the right level of content, and that the game is sort of adapting to meet their needs. Now, some games have pretty sophisticated engines that will sort of adapt the content of the game off the back of exactly what choices you do in the game. But also a well-designed game doesn't necessarily need to have an adaptive engine underneath it, because if you think about something like Angry Birds, for instance, just a casual mobile game, it puts you through a sort of progression of levels. And if you're really good at the early levels, you will quickly move to the point where you are being challenged. So it could just be that the progression of levels is enough, and you don't need to have some sophisticated engine underneath. So it's sort of two different approaches, but both end up with the same idea of individualizing your learning. And then we have the idea of scaffolding learning, which is kind of linked to the individualized learning feature as well. This is a screenshot from Civilization, the game, and if you jump right into the middle of watching someone play a commercial entertainment game such as Civilization, there can be an incredible amount of controls on the screen, all of which the player has mastered, and they're controlling a complex system of variables to get to some kind of intended outcome. They're actually dealing with multi-variables. They are often talking to other players and getting strategies in place and monitoring all kinds of metrics. So it's kind of incredible when you see someone, playing this and mastering it, and the complexity there is huge. But the way that the game has introduced that to the player is through scaffolding, where each of the interface elements is usually introduced, one at a time, and game mechanics themselves have been introduced one at a time as well. And when the player has mastered a particular element within the game, then more complexity is introduced. And so this is the idea of kind of scaffolding learning. Can be done through game levels or introduction of mechanics over time. And the other important thing here is that you get immediate in-game feedback from whatever choices that you make, and that is key to changing the course of action that you're doing. So if you have a strategy for completing a task and you get feedback on that you're not doing it correctly, then you're able to course correct very quickly. So it's very efficient. Kind of just in time learning is another kind of keyword that links into this. And just to underscore it again, all of these features that games offer are all features of a good pedagogical experience. So there's a lot of crossover. One interesting sort of way of thinking about what games do and how they cross over with what the learning sciences tell us is good pedagogy is ZPD. So you guys may have heard of the zone of proximal development, and it's sort of a learning theory. And the idea is that in the center, there are things that I can do. And then the next layer out from that are things I can do if I have some help to do them. And then the bottom layer is things that I can do, the things that I can't do. And I think that's showed up. I just got to check. Oh, yes, it has, because my the thumbnails are covering up that part of the slide. And the zone of proximal development is the middle layer here, things that I can do with help. And this is where you are being challenged in a comfortable way. So it actually turns out that if you stick into the things I can do, then that actually, is often fairly boring. And if you are challenged to do something that is too hard, then that can be stressful and people give up. So what a game is trying to do is to immediately, as quickly as possible, get you to the point where you're in your zone of proximal development. And this is great learning theory as well. And literally that is the point in a game where half the time you're sort of failing and half the time you're succeeding. So it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about failure. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do in games, and it's what this learning science shows is a good place to land as well in terms of educational experiences. And again, I'll just point out that this is not just what learning games are trying to do. This is what commercial games are trying to do as well. So I'm just going to stop again because I saw that there's a few notes that have come in. Any questions, Suzanne?
Well, I have Ira. There's a few more Zenos questions there in the chat. I had Ira handling some specifics about Zenos.
Oh, great.
So that you didn't have to move in that direction. Does anyone have any questions about what Peter has talked about other than Zenos for right now? One person is asking, in the things I can do with help zone, what is the role of frustration in learning?
Yeah, so a certain amount of frustration is actually a good thing. There's a great series of photos, and if I find them, I can share them afterwards. That a photographer took of people playing games, and when people are playing games, as in when they're doing any activity where they're in the sort of zone of proximal development, there is a lot of people who aren't, the sort of classic stock photos where they're just smiling and having fun. They are kind of looking concerned. They are looking upset sometimes. They are angry because they just failed. So some element of frustration is good. And of course, in life, we have to face frustration. So grit is an important, and tenacity is an important skill. And that is something that games, is borne out by games, because a lot of the time, actually, you're trying to do something and it is frustrating in a game. But I think the idea with this is that if you're too far out and you don't feel supported, within a game, that's from the system itself, but in the learning environment, it's from your peers and from facilitators and educators, then in that case, then you have a problem. And as I just saw the comment in there about math, a lot of people, especially if you've had a bad experience in school and you come to math as and you're trying to like combat some of these issues, there is this hang up of the horrible situations that you felt in school when you just didn't get something in math. And that is definitely something that we have to try and overcome. And I'm sure you guys already, if you're in that area, you understand.
And we have a request from Jennifer. Would you mind clicking back to the slide of qualities of good games? She wanted to grab a screenshot, but waited a little too long.
Yeah, let me just go back. Is this, so this is the one, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is the
of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but I find this is a good one to think about as you're going through to evaluate games.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you made such a good point about all of this being excellent pedagogy, period. So that's a great connection. So
great.
Okay, so it looks like Jennifer is set, and so Peter, you can move on now.
Yeah, great. Okay, so CPD done. Games and assessment. I just wanted to talk briefly about games and assessment because assessment is such a kind of hot topic at the moment, and in gaming, it's a massively hot topic as well, because I think I mentioned it earlier, but games are really a type of formative assessment, and in a world which is dominated by summative assessment so much. And just to be clear, formative assessment is assessment as you are learning, as you go through the learning process, and summative assessment is assessment at the end of a course, so an exam, test. And there's some practicalities why those exams and tests have to exist, but there's also been a massive push towards high stakes testing, often for good intentions, to ensure that we know where everyone is in terms of their learning, and we can address problems. But it has sort of backfired in some ways, in that a lot of teachers end up teaching to tests, and students are trying to learn for tests and actually not necessarily touching on the other content and skills that they need. And of course, exams excel in testing sort of knowledge, and they do so usually through multiple choice systems. And what exams aren't very good at is testing for higher level skills, such as critical thinking and collaboration, and other super important things that employers are searching for. So, and to be honest with you, these sort of 21st century skills that we need to solve the big problems that we have in our world. So all that to say is that, is there a better way? And I would argue that games can be a better way forward, where so much information is gathered as the player is playing a game, and feedback can be given almost immediately. This is a screen grab from a game that I made in the UK, where you get, after each choice, you get a little bit of information telling you how it impacted various different metrics, and you've got to try and balance those metrics. So, in-game failure, successes, and learning moments can be revealed to the player directly, but also we can grab loads of information in the back end of games and provide that back to facilitators, and also to students outside of the game. And I think there's just one concern that I have in this area, which is that in the rush to put assessment into games, that we don't kind of ruin the idea that games are playful. So we just have to be careful exactly how we integrate this into games. And really, I come from the standpoint that a good game is already sort of assessing you for the skills that it's trying to teach you. James G, who's one of the most influential people in the field of game-based learning, talks about assessment, and there's actually some more information on the next slide about him, and you can take this link and read up about his principles. But Jim G talks about assessment, saying, if you were to assess someone who's played Grand Theft Auto, and you wanted to know whether they were any good at Grand Theft Auto, you wouldn't then have them take an exam after they played the game to try and get some kind of proxy as to whether they are any good in Grand Theft Auto. No, the game itself, if they get to the end of the game or they get some level of mastery, then they have proven that they've got to a certain point. So, there's this kind of holy grail within games and assessment thinking, that if the game mechanics are nicely integrated with the learning objectives, and that's the key thing that we're trying to do, then really the assessment is already built into the game, and just kind of completing the game would give you an indication of where students are. So I do encourage you, if you're interested in this area, to take a look at the link and read up more about Jim G's principles. The principles are set out in this landmark book called What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy. And it goes through some of the things that I've been describing, but is much more comprehensive, and I'm sure much more eloquent as well. So definitely worth taking a look at that.
Peter, let me jump in because there are two questions tied
Yeah.
into idea of integrating games into learning. One is from Ira about if you could talk about the integration of games into the existing curricula, and then Squan followed that up with saying, I'm interested in blended learning and the concept of involved instruction, since too often teachers put students in online courses and games in a lab and let them have it. You alluded to assessment, but overall, what do you see the role of teachers, especially face-to-face, in game-based learning, aside from supporting navigation and such through the game?
Oh, great questions. Okay, so Ira, in terms of integrating games into existing curricula, that is key to getting games used, and I think it sort of, I mean, it depends exactly what the subject is and how you're planning to do it, but it actually ties in quite a lot to this other question about blended learning, because I don't tend to think of, and I think most people who are in this space don't really tend to think of games as being, the one magic bullet that is that you just set people to play a game and then that is it. It's just another tool that is available to learners and to educators, and it's a very compelling tool because of all the things that we've just spoken about, but it's not going to be good for absolutely everything, and it needs to be augmented, and it's not necessarily good for absolutely everyone either. Like, there may be people who need alternative forms and supplementary forms of learning as well, and that's great because that's all part of the mix of learning. You've got to look at lots of different media and use them in and tools and use them in different ways. I know in terms of integrating to existing curricula, with Zenos, we worked with the One America team that were doing pilot testing of their new program. And so what we did was, again, this answers both questions, I think, is that we really thought about the blended learning thing. So in the class time, so during the weekly class periods with the learners, they would be introduced to the games. So to get the students familiar with the games, so they could learn from each other. The teacher was actually a facilitator, would act as a guide on the side, just making sure that everyone has got into the game and answering any kind of questions that come up. We actually give a set of best practices in using games. And it doesn't, if you're an educator and you are feeling a little bit unconfident about using games, one of the strategies that you can use is that you don't have to know absolutely everything about the game. You can just model the process of learning how the game works and have peer learning take place as well. So as I say, the game was introduced, and then there would be follow-on activities that were offline, that were linked into the game. Sometimes there were actually ramp-up activities as well that we developed for each of the games, which were, again, offline activities that had a link to the game. So we actually introduced those on-ramps and those extension activities for each of the mini games that were dealing with different skill sets, and spaced them out throughout the kind of 10-week, I think it was 10-week curriculum. So we worked very closely with the sort of curriculum designers on that. And then I think, ongoing, the teachers need to monitor where the students are at, make sure that they can resolve any of the problems that are coming up, or issues. And sometimes those are technology based. Obviously, technology solutions aren't always as perfect as you want them to be. And sometimes they are sort of game instructions based as well.
Okay, and we have one more question. Peter, are learning games built on competencies?
That's a really interesting question. Sometimes they are, and I think that we are often trying to do that more than we have in the past. I think, the progression of learning game, well, the progression of learning games not necessarily in timeline order, but like, the simplest is that you're kind of, you're quizzing someone on content and it's some kind of multiple choice game. And then the next thing would be that you're looking at skills. And then, linked to that is competencies and trying to actually relate the mechanics and to sort of competencies in the real world. Now, there's always some element of it's called translation. So, it's something that you learn in a game. Can you translate that to the real world? And really, there's a lot of research that's going on in that area, but there needs to be a lot more research in that area to see, exactly how things can be translated. However, the one thing I would caution about this, and I'm about to come to this in a moment, is that there's often not that much evidence to support other forms of learning. And it's funny, when something new is introduced to a classroom or a program, often administrators or people are asking, well, where's the evidence that a game will work? And actually, that same question hasn't been asked of a textbook or some other worksheet or anything like that. So it's worth bearing that in mind as well.
Okay, that is all the questions so far in the chat. And Peter, we have about 10 minutes left. So if you want to.
Yeah, sure thing. I think we'll just be right on track here. So we talked about games and assessment. I want to make a little bit of a distinction here between gamification and game-based learning. And this may seem like a sort of technical thing, but I think it's worth talking about for just a moment. So here's a quote I'm just going to read out of a definition by a UK-based group called Future Lab. Game-based learning is a form of learning where students may learn by trial and error, by role-playing, and by treating a certain topic not as content, but as a set of rules or a system of choices and consequences. So that's game-based learning, and it's a nice definition. It's not the only one, but I use that one a lot. Now, gamification, on the other hand, I tend to think of as the process of taking game elements, so things like points and rewards and badges, and you can see some badges on the screen here that just an example from one of the games that I've produced, and applying these game elements to non-gaming experiences. So for instance, airline or supermarket loyalty reward cards do this. They kind of gamify their system. And these game elements are important in games and very widely used, but on their own, they do not make a good game. And that's where you need good game mechanics. It's good game mechanics that make a good game. And game mechanics are the things that you actually do to earn points and badges and to level up. So, in Zenos, it's talking to someone and completing a task, which might be to have understood a particular request. So there's a task, there's game mechanics, which would be, to construct a sentence or something like that. And there's points and rewards and badges associated with that. But, at the end of the day, the thing that keeps people coming back, more so than the game elements, more so than the points, is, was it fun to actually do that activity? So the risk with gamification is that we end up with a poorly designed experience that emphasizes what we call extrinsic motivation rather than fostering intrinsic motivation. So what we're ideally trying to do is foster a love for learning itself, rather than just emphasizing if you do some learning, then you'll get something cool. And the problem with that is that it then sort of emphasizes the view or the sort of the viewpoint that you've got to do something boring and dull, which is the learning, in order to get something interesting, which is the reward. And that's what we're trying to sort of move away from. Now, having said all of that, it depends on the overall design. And there's certainly great examples of gamified experiences that have been created. And it's also the case, and I you know, after I give this talk to educators and people who work with adults and kids, they often say, well, sometimes, you know, a quiz, just a quiz, a multiple choice quiz, does get the kids' attention and gets them to revise facts and all the rest of it. So it does serve a purpose. So I don't want to dismiss, you know, those kind of gamified experiences too much, because there is clearly a place for it. But I would just say that it's not making the full use of game-based learning and the potentials. So I just wanted to make that kind of distinction between those two things. So finally, and I think we've been looking, as we've gone through all of this, we've sort of been leading on the learning sciences, and all of a lot of the stuff that I've worked on is actually, you know, has all been research based, and comes out of current research around the learning sciences and gaming as applies to education. But a big barrier to things being implemented in programs is, you know, well, does this stuff actually work? And there is an increasing body of research that shows that well-designed games, when compared with other instructional conditions without them, are doing better, which is great. But there still needs to be a lot more research to be done in this area. As I said earlier, however, I don't, you know, necessarily think that should stop someone who's considering using gaming from using gaming, because educators are always making decisions about what resources to use, and obviously they can use their sort of common sense and use some of the information that hopefully I provided today to determine whether or not it's a good experience. And of course, you can test it in the classroom, and then you will be able to find out as well. So I'm just going to end, and before we have final questions, with just a final example. This one was created by Fable Vision in an effort to help low-income young adults build basic financial literacy. Fable Vision teamed up with Commonwealth to produce a series of online games for financial literacy. And this game is called Bike Club, and it's about saving for retirement. It was aimed at 18 to 34-year-olds, and actually a female audience. And the idea was to teach consumers how to better manage their money. And as far as we know, Bike Club is the first vampire-themed financial literacy game that encourages savings. It's a resource management game. Players can learn key financial information about the importance of paying off debt and saving for retirement. And you can check this one out, actually. I haven't got the link up there, but it's just at www.financialentertainment.org, financialentertainment.org. All right, so I'm just going to wrap up here. Thank you so much for listening. I'd be very, very happy to take any final questions. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'll be as quick as I can.
So, Peter, this is Patty. And for the rest of you, I'm Patty Kotsantakis from Digital Promise also. But Peter, I had one final question for you, I guess. I know you guys have worked a bunch with adults, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about how the adults you guys have worked with through Zenos or any of the others respond to the games? Like, do they like them? Do you really, are you seeing some of what the research is saying?
Yeah, definitely. And I think they do like them. I think, you know, what happens with, and I do work with kids as well, so it's interesting to compare the two. I think that sometimes the adult learners have a little bit of a skeptical view, because they're like, well, you know, this just seems like this is just fun or just play. So I think what we found is that for some students, and also, you know, educators, although there's no difference between educators who are working in the adult space and educators working in the kids space, because they also sometimes have that feeling. We provide, you know, some just sort of slides that can help explain some of this stuff in a quick way to show that actually, although it's just play and just fun, there's a lot of pedagogy that's involved in these things as well. And I think once they get into them, they start seeing that as well. But yeah, there is sometimes a little bit of skepticism in the adult space. Certainly the adults that we were working with, it's such valuable time that they're spending in these programs, that they want to make sure that everything is going towards their betterment. And so I think that's where some of the skepticism comes from. But we've definitely seen, you saw it in the videos, people get engaged and see the value for themselves.
Great. So thank you. Any other final questions? I know we're pretty close to the end here. Do look for the link. Suzanne will be sending out a follow-up with links and other information, and the link is specific to this recording. So look for that. And I thank all of you who attended. And Peter, I thank you specifically for this. It was a great hour here. Lots of great information. I think there was fabulous interest here. So thank you so much. And we will see maybe some of you in a future webinar. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
And we all start dropping off. So.
Yes, and thank you, Peter. That was wonderful. Really, really interesting. And I will be sending you a link. We will do a blog post that embeds the recording as well. So I'll send that, and your comms team can do what they want with that. From there, and
stop the recording.
Go
ahead and
stop the recording. Yeah.